Hellarena. Novel by Ayed Hindi. Part 1. Chapter 1. Twin Talk. The great entwined interstellar powers, Blue Plusive and Red Minus, were hovering at great speed, propelled by never-ending dark space energy. Together, they were united by fate and separated by their own characteristics. The doubled one was roaming freely into boundless space when it reached planet Earthington in their universal journey. At that time, Red Minus asked Blue Plusive, his companion, during their Amaranthan journey, "My one and only friend, you are a genius. You have brought forth a whole new life on this new planet, which you have named Earthington in your own infinite record. However, those few said to be immortal creatures appear to have vanished into vast jungles and other areas of deserted land. They appeared to me, without any disrespect, to be hopeless, gloomy, and quite inert, and ultimately, as a matter of fact, they are hapless and feckless into that vast type of world. Don't you regret having created them as such?" Red Minus questioned with incredulity and continued. "By doing nothing at all, I meant that they seem equal and same in every way. They are living, consuming, and aiming for nothing. And they have no fear or remorse of any type of feeling that goes beyond their own ego, including us, the heavenly supreme rulers. I'm still curious as to the wisdom that went into creating them and how you able to allow them to exist perpetually up until this point without feeling the need to compete. Like the two of us, they ought never to have been bestowed with any of the divine powers." Blue Plusive was surprised by his twin's criticism during that journey, and after a space moment of reflection, "Maybe you're correct, my equal twin, Red Minus. I had forgotten about them until you brought their existence up on that planet. At the beginning of our conjoining period after the great universe nascent, I had the idea of embedding and populating some of these barren rocky planets, worlds, with various creatures in order to have a different experience and another varied scenery for each one of them for the purpose of entertaining my wisdom whenever I chose to visit during my unlimited traveling. However, I might exaggerate and give them some of the powers to be immortals, but I thought at the time sensibly that I would not be worried about their fate in a good way, and always whenever I visit this planet, I can meet someone still existing from them. Simply, it's a whim for something different than the other barren planets. On the other hand, I don't want to be remembered as a failed Blue Plusive and lose my creations due to neglect while I am busy with other terrestrial matters. Your ego shadowed your own simplistic judgment, my friend," Red Minus said and continued. "That was a primitive miscalculation on your part, and it preceded. In my humble thinking, my companion, on account of their perceived endless existence, they have lost all basic worries, fear, and all other inner ambitions for the reason of establishing and exploring new horizons on this planet, and they have missed the most important thing: hope. They don't need it now, and the desire to live does not exist. My twin, Blue Plusive, you might want to reconsider the fate of those creatures and rethink what they see in you as their creator. And you ought always to be remembered as the truculent, impregnable Blue Plusive that bears everything into his might and nothing lays unto their hands." "What is on your mind, Red Minus? Do tell me now," asked eagerly Blue Plusive. "I would suggest that maybe your highness should debase some of the qualities they acquired from before and turn those products of yours into inferior mortals and vulnerable creatures, active in seeking knowledge for surviving and relying on whatever is available in their land to continue living and ever persisting." Red Minus said and continued. "They are very similar in shape, and there are only a few of them. Even if you are worried about their existence there, and even if we want to visit them at any given opportunity, it's hard to find them in their solitude on that planet. You should switch their existing from infinite to finite creatures, but give them the ability to reproduce so they can regenerate and fill in this space. Then they won't be exterminated from this planet, Earthington, for the time being, yet again. Why are you so worried if they ever vanished? You can still create another species. Don't you share my thoughts?" Blue Plusive answered. "That's an idea. Then I would hand their destiny temporarily back to you, Red Minus. You are better at corrupting, commanding, and supervising them after I turn them into inferior mortals and into obedient servants. But will you give them hope and something to live for, like you said?" Illusion is their best hope, my friend, Red Minus replied. While they will suffer finding food, sheltering, and protecting themselves on this planet, they will learn to ask and beg for help. After all, I created a parallel world to yours, Abyssington, where they will spend their inferiority there after their final departure from the planet, though all they can find is delusion. Red Minus continued. They will struggle and fight for everything found around them, even over simple mirage, for the reason of the feeling that they had missed until now. It will be the sense of insecurity and weakness in this place after realizing that they all are doomed to perish. Eventually, they will always seek your mercy in the hope for immortality again. Illusion, my friend. Oh, and another thing. They will perceive the differences between them after I reshape them. Envy and jealousy shall prevail, and that is the reason for future disagreements and bloody struggles. And finally, we know both of us that everything for them is to end. Time is futile, empty, and meaningless. That could be a better explanation for the mortal life. Except if you decide otherwise, dear Blue Plusive, at least they might learn and flourish, or they end up destroying themselves by their own heinous acts, as they don't need any help of yours. But would I ask your opinion? Yes, Red Minus. What do you want more after you brought all of these wicked thoughts? Asked Blue Plusive. When you turn them into a vulnerable creature, they will start seeking solace in a higher superior being in multitude, even the virtual of them. After they lose their own perpetuity, they will start worshipping, praying, and begging different idols and many varieties of deities out of their own imaginative creation. They won't be the same as you know them right now, equal and impregnable. They will have order and disorder, class and classless mortals. For that reason, they all need illusion. You won't be bothered by that, Blue Plusive? Duh. No, I won't be envious or even concerned, Red Minus, if that what is on your mind, for I know how you will turn their minds into hallucinating visions. After all, their purpose with me is being done from the moment I turn them into mortal creatures. They will deserve nothing as long as they have that chance of living and surviving for a short time on this planet. Yes, Blue Plusive, as we know, everything ever created has a limit, indeed for us. Sadly, it's true. Our energy is bound to an end eventually, and it would be the end of history. Halt, you insistent retelling of our own fate, Red Minus. You're being rudely sarcastic even on our own eventual demise. But do you think they will still remember us? After all, we were among them for some time. I appreciate that you do care about them or your self-image, and I thought for a moment that you wouldn't be bothered or interfere with your creation's minds. Hence, my friend Blue Plusive, your ego is still soaring, and for that matter, I will make sure they will have an inherent ego that swell exponentially through their time and receive some of your profuse qualities. In the future, everything they create or make has an imprint on your overflowing intelligence. Red Minus proceeded. Nothing ever will be a new thing. It is all shadow in their own reasoning mind, endowed by you, my friend, and by me for sure. They will always have scattered hints and hidden clues lying around them. They just need scratching and digging to find that idea. It is a game I'm eagerly willing to play. With your permission, my twin, I will send one of my deputies to implement, execute, and supervise what we have just agreed upon. And I will send one of mine as well, to make sure you won't spoil everything I made. Our deputies will make things evolve gradually in their own space and time. They both will be entangled with each other in fate, like us, and that is how the future will always be. But do tell me, Red Minus, how the game will take place. There was a plan, and Red Minus revealed it. I'll deport many of your creations from Earthington to my new place, Abyssington. There our big game will take place. It is a confined sphere inside a planet where they will fight each other for survival. There is no escape and no solace. Everyone is in constant war. It is the Hellarena doom. No winners or losers, but only existing and non-existing. You fight to live for one more crumb of time. You do your bet and I'll do mine. Agreed, said Blue Plusive. I'll have the strongest surviving team. I'll bestow power on them. My team will win, and they will return triumphant to their original Earthington, but promise me, no cheating, said Blue Plusive. Agreed, said Red Minus. You create and I annihilate. Who will outlast the other? My team will have the power to seek only death, no mercy or a tender heart. We'll be victorious, and your Earthington will be a barren planet," said Red Minus. Hashtag Chapter 2. Red Minus First Act. The creation of Hellarena. In boundless and interminable space, Red Minus created planet Abyssington, which was completely veiled from the starlight of heaven while orbiting into the immense cosmic vacuum space among the many massive and existing peculiar galaxies in the far, deep, dark, and the endless space. The planet was floating around in complete dimness. To the naked eye, it was nothing more than an empty, pierced, dark sphere devoid of any sign that life had ever existed there. Yet for those who were unaware, life had been established and was happening extraordinarily within that singularly different world. The planet was hollowed out, but life was nevertheless able to arise there. Clay, plants, and, most importantly, clean water and air. All of the elements needed for life started to seep into its innards. The environment of the planet has changed over the millennia as a result of the inner essence being forced into space by the ongoing, massive volcanic eruptions that violently jolted the core for decades of space years. Until the outburst settled down and left a spherical-shaped empty shell with a thick entourage that holds the very life attached to it and allows it to create an atmospheric-like living belt to protect it from further remaining poisonous volcanic effects. While the rest of the huge cavity was hollowed, emptied, and covered with seas of obsidian as a result of a volcanic eruption, the central core of that planet cavity remained occupied with a massive, eternal, and entwined fire, burning permanently, never stopping and never ceasing. The entwined fire provided the inner enclosed space with much-needed energy, power, and vitality. This unique, everlasting inferno was for the plant inhabitants the true manifestation of the holy blue-plusive and red-minus powers, unfolding all the time in front of every living creature inside that planet, watched by the people, entangled with them, and it for them, signifying the true interactions between the subjects and a truthful eternal energy. There was a very small planet orbiting around the Great Fire in continuous synchronized rotation, creating a time scale inside that isolated planet. Life has nourished over time for the inner inhabitants, inside that isolated planet, on account of the other unique quality that separates this planet from the rest into the vast galaxies, and that is the gravity force to hold everything together uniquely, concentrated on the outer planet shell and pulling the surrounding of the inner planet with a uniform reverse force, leaving the center core with a gravity force equal to zero. That gravity force balanced the vital, everlasting fire into the central point of the hollowed planet. The inhabited people on the planet had lived for many centuries inside, and they had adapted gradually to the treacherous conditions of hard living and were allowed to be dominant in that enclosure, albeit to their limited knowledge. They had never seen outer space or the stars. All that lies outside of their realm in the confined planet is obscured by their limited comprehension and beyond their own senses. Yet, they lived in harmony and solidarity in their own imposed confinement. They had worked and built their own unique civilization, and through the passing of time, they achieved and developed many different nations inside that planet, with each nation distinguishing characteristically from the other in a diverse concept of life. The inhabitants were all united in the wise and astute use and utilization of the planet's destitute resources. The leaders of the tribes in the Abyssington planet had arranged a delicate order run by a body of wise men to organize the distribution of these scarce resources to all the living nations in a fair and just manner. That order of fairness lasted until it became evident to the inhabitants of the planet that the remaining resources were being exhausted and were about to completely disappear. The lack of resources led to a great deal of competition among the isolated nations on acquiring the remaining means, which consequently sparked and triggered the voracious wars of survival among them. The system of energy allocation that they had created and continued for many centuries had suddenly collapsed after Red Minus intervention, and everything inside that planet went into a bloody and chaotic struggle. As a consequence, the inevitable brutal wars had descended mightily upon the people of that planet and only left them, at the end, stronger will survive the final game, yet for just another period of Abyssington time. Chapter 3. Red Minus Second Act. It was mid-steamy May at the time. and the great annual sandstorms were at their high apotheosis and at their epic peak of the cruelest raging and damaging activity in the mainly desert region. The vast Mesopotamia land was heavily hit and totally covered with enormous thick layers of hot, fine sand, brought violently from the great peninsula desert on its devastating marching way towards the east. The boisterous tempest blinded the sight, shortened the healthy breath, and deafened the ears with the awash showers of dust clouds. The storm was a usual occurrence as it touches down every year in a similar period at the end of spring seasons, but only lasts for a few days. However, this time was phenomenally different. It was hotter, denser, vigorous in power, prolonged, and ceaseless in its malign disembark on the scattered huts and mud structures around the city of Kish, the great city between the two giant rivers, dispersing the weakly unstable coverings and rooting out the entrenched palm trees to float into the orange, sandy, packed skies. In the midst of that enraged crisis, the scared people gathered in the main city square, in front and around the big stone temple, looking for shelter, protection, and a savior, praying that any heavenly help might descend from their worshipped idols. Eliad, the chosen one by Red Minus team, shouted at them at this moment of deep doom and distress. Punishment and purgatory had been imposed on the wicked and unrepentant souls of our remaining people. All of the Galatians' tribes will suffer the final painful judgment. Your prayer is all in vain. You thought you would share immortal life after death. It is a delusional notional. You all have no choice but to succumb to your final dark fate. It is only Blue Plusiv's judgment not to redeem the whole lost souls of our sinned nations, and all of you will be castigated and eliminated from this land, in multitude, away from this whole place. The gathering had too much to bear and endure from him. What is on your mind, old man? Can't you see the misery we are all suffering from? Try to help and pray among us instead of your crazy, meaningless speeches at this horrible time of our crisis. Eliad continued his insane shouting at them relentlessly despite their apparent protest. You don't need any help to survive. It is futile. It has been all determined and decided. We all shall be sent to Hellarena in Abyssington. You know what Abyssington is? It is a place of correction for sinners like you. You don't deserve to be here on this land. Your absent and coward idols won't help you in your miserable preordained fate. They won't listen to your foolish, disparate, and empty calls. All of you are complaining because your water is mixed with mud and slate, but in there, it will be mixed with fire, bitterness, and endless pain. It is a different world than your imagination, full of horrible punishment, and every second you have to fight to survive. There is no let-up, and there is no escape even if you dare to. It is not here anywhere on the face of this land. It is far away up there in the skies, above your stupid heads. We shall be moved and, transcendently, sent away. Our souls will be imprisoned in that remote Hellarena realm where we shall be subjected to stern and endless purification, and the real Blue Plusive denotes only abstruse hope for our people and vague promises of possible return, and that would be only after a true salvation. The desperate gathered mass angrily asked him in what authority he was prophesying about, and what is his proof on this grim foretell. They asked him over again, who is your deity? What powers does he have over the nations? He told them in a tired voice, listen to me carefully. This scourging storm won't clear until our flesh departs from our bones. The intense heat will seethe the livings, and the whole place will be set ablaze. It was a truthful vision revealed to me, my people, to foretell and portend you about the grim fate awaiting in the very near future. That is the Blue Plusive's perdition of a sore judgment that had been imposed upon all of us. The cursed, and the deportation of our nation into Abyssington exile is to be commenced. No one would escape the inevitable, he said sincerely to his people, preparing them for the near future major transformation, and only those who wanted to listen understood that their fate was sealed. He fell into silence, like a deserted graveyard, to the relief of some of the gathering, resting on the bare, dirty ground. He then began having multiple fits of pain and agony. His breathless body and colorless face started to convulse in a melancholy setting. It didn't take long until he was a lifeless corpse. The dead body started to corrupt rapidly, and the skin began to split open and crack deep into his flesh. His head tapered, and the bones started to molt and break up. The corpse remains withered and vanished among the dense dust in the non-stop whirling winds. The rest of the gathering rallied inside the temple, hoping to save themselves, but it was inevitable. The roofless temple started to crumble upon them, and stone by stone, the walls fell apart. There was no escape, and short after Eliad's death, most of his people followed his grim path. They all suffered the same miserably imposed death sentences, their ashes rounded up to swirl in a huge bulk of revolving columns. They were all wrapped in high, ascending wind into the unseen depths of the blue skies to an unknown destination and obscured fate. Chapter 4. Splitting the teams inside the captivity. Blue Plusive Team. Throughout the sleepless days inside that hollow Abyssington world, the remnant of the never-ending destructive and bloody wars that were still occurring constantly. The everlasting struggles were merely fueled by the impetus desire towards holding control of all energy resources under the notion of total ethnic cleansing, which manifested itself visibly and clearly everywhere inside Hellarena. Destruction spread around in every corner and in every place, to the very ruins of what once was a great thriving civilization. The devastation had spread everywhere inside the planet and gave witness to the ebullient thirst for killing and the inhabitable agog of raising any opposition standing structure inside that solitary, unique planet. What endured of that great civilization inside Abyssington after the initial phase of cruel devastation were three of the remaining surviving nations. The Galatians, which constitute the majority of the nations, were strongly inspired by the Red Minus plan. The Malinese were the minority nation that remained fighting against the supremacy of the Galatians. They were relying on Blue Plusive mercy. And the mutineers, a small clan of unaligned people living in the caves, were protected by Lord Norgel, the commander of the upper world, and they were considered the wild card in the wars. The League of Nations consisted of tribes splitting and separating the living areas unequally and unevenly inside Abyssington, and were only marked by the ever-rapid moving of virtual borders for the purpose of announcing and proclaiming the gradual annihilation of the defeated nations' populations. One of the surviving nations on this planet were the Malini people of the Lava Falls, the planet's original indigenous inhabitants, who moved earlier into Hellarena and were supported by Blue Plusive. They have gathered with other lesser clans to form the United Malinese Tribes. The Malini tribes banded together after being pushed by the other dominant nation, the Galatians, into the southern concave-shaped pole area, where they were able to scramble their remaining troops and armies in their final attempt to defend themselves against the mighty Galatian troops supported by Red Minus. During the final fierce wars, they had sheltered and cowered into the steeply southern Rocky Mountain caves, which seemed to be their last possible resort of survival and the last remaining line of defense, although it was the weakest and most critical area of the planet's mantle. The crust depth there was the thinnest and frieliest of the other planet's circumference, and they were not sure if it could continue to hold out against the heavy fire bombardment, the extensive shelling from the Galatian armies, and, to add on, the remaining volcanic eruptions that were still relatively active around the area itself. Nonetheless, the Malini tribes had made a pledge between them to unite again as one nation, despite the differences, and vowed on creating one leadership council for governing and living together rather in a loose bond and frail unity. They managed to establish a League of Nations to replace the doomed energy system in order to allocate everything that was available there, from vital resources and energy to the most needed, like food and water, in between them in fair share and equal allotments, just like their ancestors used to do before the war broke out on a universal scale. The actual powers lay in the hands of the Supreme Malini Council, which represented the gathering clans equally and was headed by Barkle, the first man from the Graki clan, famous for their courage and bravery, renowned for their immutability in holding their positions and self-sacrifice, despite being hugely outnumbered by the Galatians' troops in the bloody conflicts. Yet with their persistence, they endured fighting spirits and ferocity in defending the remaining nations with perseverance and diligence. and now they have assumed the leadership in the Malinese army's top ranks, deservedly. It was a tremendous burden to control and to stay in charge of the divided, and at the same time surrounded competing clans of the Malini nations that were squeezed and packed inside a small area within the confined city, as commanding the people seemed for some of their own leaders as a deluded mirage lurking from far to the painful desperation of those collapsed and cornered nations on account of the emotions that regularly erupt highly in a brutal daily striving for living and towards unforeseen certainty and unknown fate hanging over everyone existing in that doomed city. Frequently, differences break out and can, without difficulty, escalate to a bloody confrontation between the different groups within the surrounded nations at the fragile south pole of the planet during those critical and crucial moments of a nation's life. Barkle emerged as a great leader, and what made him successful was his ability to hold all clans together, bridge the differences between them, and manage to abate the flared frictions. While he stood out as the most respected and listened to, helped by his own wisdom and caring attitude, and also supported and helped by two of his important deputies, Princess Lion and Prince Cadorf the Indignant, they worked together alongside the other elected 12 senators of the Supreme Council who represent the gathered nations in the council equally. The invincible Princess Lion, the only remaining daughter of the last dead king of the Radgul tribes, who had been killed in a fierce and bloody battle. Along with him were his brave sons fighting against the invading Galatians troops and defending the last city they were holding in their land. The merciless invading troops ran down and overcame the fierce resistance of the Radgul's troops in their old capital, and the fallen king and his children were slaughtered at the hands of the Galatian soldiers, and their severed heads were impaled upon bayonet to demonstrate the great victory the Galatians had achieved over the defeated nation. Many of Princess Lion's people and family members were viciously massacred and dismantled in those bloody wars, and what remained of her clan eventually had to depart their territory and join the Malini. This tragic, sorrowful fate inflicted upon her people and close family made Princess Lion even more resolute and determined to fight to the bitter end, although she has no other choice left but to avenge her people's brutal death or die as a martyr and not in shame. She put down any other dissimilarities she had with the other factions and fought bravely together against the warrior troops surrounding them. She never gave up hope and vowed with Prince Cadorf to continue fighting alongside him, even though everyone else in the military of the other clans had no confidence in him and his leadership, despite his apparent sincerity shown inside the council meetings for his arrogance and selfishness since he refused to fight alongside them at the beginning of the Galatians' brutal and bloody campaign of extinction. Prince Cadorf joined the council in the late last days, after his troops were defeated by the Galatian army, and his army was badly suffered and decimated. Despite Prince Cadorf having a truce and collaborating with the Galatians, at the end, their services were not needed anymore, and they had to face the same deadly fate designated for all Malini. What is left of his army after the defeat was to retreat from their rich and affluent land. Accompanied by the remaining members of his clan, they reached Zediapolis city exhausted and broken following a long and hard struggle, and he asked to join the remaining united troops of the Malini to defend the last standing defense against the Galatians' aggression and to attempt to regain his lost land from the hands of his enemies. Chapter 5. Red Minus Team. The Galatians. In the midst of intense preparations and loud clamor mixed with cacophony, resounding heavily out of the great gathering, conglomerate inside the royal hall, a group of heavily armed soldiers rushed through a long marbled columned portico towards the royal chamber, pleading for Prince Evauda presence to his subjects. "My lord, I hope you are ready now for the great ceremony. My lord, your subjects are all well gathered and awaiting impatiently at the grand hall, raring for your graceful presence." Marketh, the cruel, assiduous henchman and the head of the honorary royal guards, spoke in a brittle and fainted voice, as he was slowly lurking into the royal chamber, to his master, Prince Avauda, whom was in turn preparing himself serenely for the coronation event. It was a very big moment and long-awaited ambition to be fulfilled and for the prince to be finally enthroned. The new king of the great Galatians empire of the hollowed planet was his ultimate desire to achieve, at last. Prince Avauda, the megalomaniac, egoist prince, was calmly sitting on his ornate wooden royal chair inside his prodigious chamber, surrounded by numerous bronze statues and walls covered with fine marble, occupied partially by steel racks to exhibit the countless number of golden swords, iron spears, and lethal war javelins. Lying next to him were a scattered bright apparel, apparently been discarded, while the prince himself was fully engrossed in deep thinking and staring aimlessly into a huge bronze sculpture hanging on the wall in front of him. Nonetheless, he answered Marketh's request firmly after sensing his heavy presence inside the room. "Yes, I think I am ready now, but tell me, Marketh, is my daughter in there, among the guests?" "Yes, my lord. Everyone you had invited is there waiting in the hall." It took him a while for the middle-aged prince to finally left himself and by then standing up tall from the cozy wooden chair, wearing his long white silky garment to cover his lofty build, equipped with a golden emblazoned belt that was tightened around his small waist and was holding his diamond-decorated dagger rested upon his upper right thigh and a wide black cloak lying over his wide shoulders to mark, and more important, portraying his royal powers and his wisdom. Then, he gently placed a white cover made of fine linen over his head and walked out the royal chamber calmly to an adjacent marbled stoic corridor, carrying his golden royal spear and leading the way to the grand hall, surrounded and followed by his closest armed guards, marching in formation. They went on until they swiftly approached the grand entree through a lobby, and with great grace, the upcoming king attained and met with the eager, exhilarated gathering of his nation's representatives and dignitaries in the ravished, grandiose royal hall. The place was dined with clamor of rejoice and delight as the guests finally had their sight upon their new king, and immediately upon his arrival, the royal announcer declared the inception of the coronation ceremony, followed by loud blares, trumpeted out loudly from the ram's horns, that were held high by the honorary army soldiers, deafened the ears of the gathering as the king walked closely towards the holy altar, centered at the end of the hall, and by following the old decorum. King Avauda kneeled gently on his knees in front of the altar and started to pray, emphatically. "O, Red Minos, blessed forever and ever, your name will be glorified eternally. Have mercy upon us, your humbled subjects, since our disgraceful and painful departure and outcast from our ancestors' land on your beloved Earthington, and moved away to be here, relinquishing us, your beloved people, into this cruel, remote, desolated, and confined planet. Upon your holy purpose and in judgment, albeit it was a wise choice. But we've been suffering in multitude, day after day, for generations without any tiny shred of hope, stands before our own eyes. Have mercy, O Red Minos, upon us, your humbled and faithful subjects. We all believe in our final redemption and the promised exodus back towards our own long-lost land. Bliss your chosen son to lead this nation blissfully under your holy command. Give me the power to lead and steer our nation to the final victory, in your name, Sake." It was a brief, yet forcible strong speech, revealed loudly by the king to be, reverberated inside the great royal hall, as the audience appeared to quiver and rattle by those loud shouts, arousing from the prostrated king, Avauda, the newly acclaimed monarch of the Galatians people, consecrated the ceremony for Red Minos, praying among the great gatherings as he was laying on his knees, appeared ostentatiously sincere for the amazed spectators, as he was worshipping in deep reverence and in awe to the holy Red Minos statue that was embodied and symbolized, hugely and mightily, into a great piece of copious bronze cauldron effigy, felled a verve raging fire, and it was exquisitely erected over a wide marbled garnet hexagonal altar in the grandiose royal hall, inside the king's stupendous castle. The Red Castle, as it was called by the prince, served as the main headquarters for Avauda royal ambitions, and also to his own military legions and vast armed troops. It was built meticulously upon a great rock, which was floating mightily over into the great lava lake. Yet, it was positioned far away from the capital city, Randon, where the newly enthroned king would rule his people and command the huge Galatians army. Then the king, as he was still lying on his knees, started abruptly to beat in fist, slugging his own chest and praying even louder, not to huge surprise to the rest of the onlookers as they were watching the old traditional rituals of remorse, penance, and thanksgiving to the Lord for eternal mercy, the same way it had been practiced for the past times. The place was fueled by clamor and huge manifestation of happy cheers. When the king finally straightened up triumphant, after ending what meant to be a passionate rituals performance to affirm his new position, the king walked back and turned towards his audience, and behind him, lined in reverence, all of his loyal army generals and the remaining tribal leaders, mingling among them the nobles from his family, who supported him to claim his highest position as the supreme king of the Galatians, the emerging powerful empire of all the planet. The long ceremony finally concluded by the official monarch ordination, as the head of the wise men council, approached the king slowly in adoration and placed the precious holy royal crown over the new king's head and set the golden accolade around the king's chest and present him with the diamond-encrusted golden sword to pronounce him formally the great king of the Galatians people and the protector of the everlasting holy fire. King Avauda finally, to his ultimate satisfaction, he assumed his dearer position at the precious royal crown and began his much-desired rule, much to his long-awaiting ambitions as he is now belatedly the supreme king of the hollow planet. On the other hand, for the rest of the elite of the attendants at the royal ceremony, it was another peculiar royal ordination has taken place, once again, but not long ago since their memories still vivid with the last moments of his predecessor, late King Solomon, as the audience have been through these coronation events many times in the recent past. While except the marveled palace, there is nothing new and over-sensational occurred, as the frozen smells of the rotten corpses still blocking the noses of the living conspirators, who managed to recover and retain what they presumed it's their own right to rule and govern over their own people. Nonetheless, everyone seemed to show happiness for the new rising king to assume his position as they gradually began to forget the old bygone king, and they started heartily to welcome the new era of King Avauda reign. The newly crowned king concluded his royal procession and signaled for the start of the celebration among the attendances, whom started to enjoy the lavish food and the variety of drinks, which were spread generously on the lined-up diner tables, while the king couldn't wait more to reveal his intentions. He called on his newly appointed deputy in charge of the vast military army legions, the commander of the Galatians army, General Zingi, to accompany the new king for a private chat, and when they started to walk alongside of the gatherings in a show of power and solidarity, the king turned and lurched slightly towards the general and told him, asserting his never-ending ambitions, "General Zingi, what is your thought about the ceremony? It is great and marvelous, my lord. It lavish and organized and suit only a great king. I have never seen like this before." The general answered the king, who was, in return, smirking at the general, and he told him, "Surely you haven't seen anything like it because you have never been invited to one before. Thanks to me, I made you the highest commander of the whole of our brave army as soon as I assumed my rightful position as the ruler of our great nation. Of course, for the reason of your intelligence, bravery, and you always had followed my lead. Now, we have to work together, General. It is a new and final. To materialize our cherished and sacred goals, to proceed to the end with our mission and finish what we all have started, and to achieve what we had planned all along. To clean up this planet totally and defiantly from the wretched creatures and the servile riff-raff of the unclean races that adulterating our planet for such a long time till now, and we will all eventually, under red minus mercy, shall prevail and become immortal when we finished cleaning this holy confined place. We all shall be immortal according the promise of our red minus. When we do away and eliminate the contaminated races that still holding on in some pockets around this planet. That is our massage and our only hope to the true exodus. We will never forlorn our goals, General. Our last unfortunate dead king was too lenient and unduly tolerant. He lost his foresight and wisdom and was fooled to believe that we could all live together, side by side with the miscegenation unclean blood. Now it is our role to correct this fatal misjudgment and proceed with our noble goals to exterminate them from the planet. The king stopped his long speech, took a deep breath, and turned to the general, examining his facial reaction, who has in turn rapidly answered him with a light bow and a show of respect. Yes, my lord, me and your brave soldiers are all ready as ever to follow your wise orders to the end victory. Very well, General. Is there anything else in your mind you want to tell me? No, my lord, but, The general stopped short from continuing talking as the king looked at him, wondering what the general is hiding from him. My lord, I see your daughter there, Princess Kara. She seems very happy, and I wanna— Yes, you are right, the king interrupted him. She is indulging the party and looks pleased. But she will be even happier when I will surprise her later. General, you know very well she is my only daughter and the only memory left after her mother's sudden tragic death. I wanted always the best for her. That is why one of your brave captains, I have chosen, to share her life and to be my son-in-law, General. You will hear the announcement very soon and you may enjoy the party for now. General Zingi left astounded with overwhelming feelings of resentment and anger, while the king strolled away gracefully through the chamber and started to mingle with his close subjects, hugging his only daughter, Princess Kara, in front of the enthusiastic audience, and as a matter of unexpected surprise to the gathering. The king introduced her to Captain Ravdan, her fiancé and the future royal husband to his dear daughter, a very close servant officer into the king inner circle. The king announces the engagement amid loads of happy shouts, came out loudly from the honorable guests, but he turned to the prospect husband and warned him in a fatherly manner. My son, be kind. This is my only daughter, and she is very dear to my heart. Take good care of her. She could be here, one day, to rule this great nation and the whole planet. Yes, my lord, in my heart and my soul. I shall do my utmost to make your daughter the happiest person among the Abyssington. End of part 1.